Hey guys, this is Zach Hartzler. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars The Mandalorian discussion episode. I've really been enjoying doing these during paternity leave because there's something that you guys are really watching in good numbers and really seem to like, and I can kind of just talk about a show that I'm really enjoying. So as always, we will also have some Star Wars Squadrons footage in the background. I'll cut to relevant stuff when I can, but this might also be a good episode to just listen to as you're doing something else. Of course, major spoilers for the prior episode of The Mandalorian. That's episode 4 of season 2, chapter 12, The Siege. With that being said, let's get into things. So, The Siege was a very interesting episode as we discussed yesterday. A lot of people had it written off as sort of filler, but it ended up tying in a bunch of season 1 plot points to the current trajectory of season 2. There was also one big mystery box moment, and I am kind of using that ironically, as the Mandalorian and his crew were running through the Imperial base. They stumble upon some weird room with multiple floating bodies suspended in liquid. And I actually didn't recognize at first that this was multiple bodies and multiple vats. I thought it was just one big vat with multiple windows. But again, if you listen to the described audio like we talked about yesterday, it lays that all out fairly clearly. And there have been lots of interesting theories about what's going on inside these vats, with a lot of people, of course, claiming that this is either Snoke or Palpatine in there, with, I'd say, the Snoke angle being much more popular. Personally, and I understand and respect where this is coming from, I think that theory is way off the mark. Let's talk about why, and I just want to start first from a broad perspective, why I wouldn't have believed this before even seeing this episode. So The Mandalorian is increasing in scope as we've got these tie-ins to the greater universe in season 2 with Ahsoka coming and Bo-Katan and everything else, but I still don't think this show will want to tie itself that closely to the Skywalker saga and the main stuff that's going on in this period in the Star Wars universe. I think The Mandalorian will kind of always want to maintain its status as a sort of Western. I think the story at the end of this series will be of the Mandalorian, of his adventures, and I think everything that happens will probably be subservient to that and his relationship with the child. And on that note, I don't think Moff Gideon will be a huge character after The Mandalorian. I think he'll probably be killed before anything crazy goes on or he takes over the galaxy or whatever else. On that note, let's talk about Moff Gideon, a character who is still fairly mysterious despite appearing, pretty consistently at the end of season 1 and now through season 2. First of all, I read Moff Gideon as an Imperial warlord rather than somebody who's trying to resurrect the true Empire or the First Order. Now, we do admittedly get a reference to the New Order in this episode, but this is taking place in 9 ABY. The actual formation and appearance of the First Order is still fairly far off, and I think the rest of the evidence regarding Gideon indicates that he's got a kind of smaller scale thing going on here. First of all, Gideon was not taken after the Battle of Jakku to the secret rendezvous where the rest of the First Order founders went. I read him as more focused specifically on making himself powerful. He wields the dark saber, apparently as evidence of his triumph over the Mandalorians. He sort of secluded himself into a small part of the galaxy. It doesn't seem like he's got greater connections elsewhere, although I guess that will be determined. But it just doesn't feel like he's doing anything other than trying to make a powerful new army for himself, maybe to carve out his own mini empire. I think it'd be very strange for all of this stuff, which we've assumed is happening on Exegol, including the creation of a new Snoke, to be happening on a random volcano world under an under-equipped Moff, rather than at a secret Sith hiding place. Regarding Palpatine specifically, it seems like, based on what we know so far in canon, that Palpatine transferred pretty much immediately to a new body after his death at Endor on Exegol, so I definitely don't think that's what Moff Gideon is doing here. And I just think that, assuming that this is Snoke or Palpatine in these chambers, totally misses the whole tone of the series, but I also want to look now at actual evidence from the show itself, both for and against. So first of all, I want to talk about the call between Dr. Pershing and Moff Gideon, or the holo that Pershing left, and there are a few really interesting tidbits in there. First of all, we know there is at least one volunteer who has been receiving blood transfusions from the child, who has a high M count, which presumably refers to a high midi-chlorian account, indicating his power in the Force. We learn that these transfusions brought on the intended effect for a fortnight, but then failed catastrophically in at least one prior case. To me, this screams much more more heavily that the person receiving the transfusions is not being cloned or something like that, but rather Moff Gideon and the crew are trying to imbue Force powers artificially into a pre-existing being. My guess, based on what we've seen for Gideon so far, is that he intends to inject himself eventually with these so he can become very powerful and truly become the ruler of at least that small section of the galaxy. To play devil's advocate though, it's also possible that the blood of a Force sensitive is needed to imbue a clone with the power of the Force, but I don't think necessarily that's what's happening. Another main argument made by a lot of people is that the clone itself actually looks like Snoke, and if you examine the creature floating in the tank, there are some similarities, mostly the deformities, but I think overall there's not really a whole lot indicating that they're the same being. The main thing that people argue is that this living thing here has a gash just like Snoke does, but if you actually look at the two subjects, the cuts are completely different. Snoke's goes basically across his cranium and down between his eyes, and by the way, we see that of all the clones on the vat on Exegol, well, this creature has a cut that goes basically around his head, then down past his eyes. We also see massive deformities, maybe like tumors or some sort of growths that obviously weren't intended, or at least didn't materialize as intended, and I'm not sure what's going on there. Perhaps they're trying to make really muscular sort of operators for the new droids or suits or whatever they are, or who knows really. A lot of speculation here, but I just don't think so far that it is Snoke. Let's continue though, because there is more to talk about. There is concept art of these beings floating in the tank, and funny enough, this furthers how I feel about this. This doesn't look like Snoke to me. It looks very similar to what we see, funny enough, on Kedjem in Jedi Knight 2, where beings are being artificially infused, or at least the Empire is attempting to artificially infuse them with the Force. I say funny enough because I've talked about Kedjem in reference to this episode and the Imperial base there a bunch of times, and I just think the similarities continue. The final thing that people have been really pointing to indicate that this is Snoke is the fact that his theme shows up, and not really in my opinion. This is more a motif that originally appeared in the Plagueis scene of Revenge of the Sith. A user on Reddit had a really good comment, which I agree with wholeheartedly. I'm not trying to hate Nice Find, but I think that's a bit of a stretch. There's nothing really distinguishing about a low drone. Even the rhythmic structure of the Snoke's theme, which I'm not even hearing in the Mando clip, is not unique enough to say it was intentional in my opinion. Low droning tones are just pretty synonymous with the ominous. It could have been intentional, but I don't hear enough to say that it is, and I agree 1000%. This wasn't meant to show that it's Snoke, it's meant to show that this is something scary and that this is something bad. I think this being Snoke clearly ignores the structure of the episode. We get the cloning chamber or the infusion chamber or whatever else it is, then we get payoff at the end when we see the Dark Troopers, which I assume will either be used alongside these Force-imbued subjects or maybe even controlled by them. I think the whole point here is that Gideon is trying to use technology to become a powerful warlord, to make his own little empire. I really would be surprised at this point if this was meant to be Snoke or Palpatine, or really to tie into the sequel trilogy or the Skywalker saga to that extent. But that's just my opinion. Did I convince you? Did I change your mind? Or do you believe what you believed before you watched this video? Let me know all of that and where you fall down on which side of the issue down in the comments. Until next time though guys, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.